The small research vessel drifted helplessly between two dying stars, its hull cracked like broken glass in the silence of deep space. Thin streams of glowing gas leaked from its wounded frame, vanishing instantly into the void. Inside, alarms blinked in fading red patterns as life support systems struggled to hold on. Captain Vel stood frozen at the command console. The numbers did not lie, even when he wished they would. Oxygen dropping. Power collapsing. Structural integrity failing with every passing minute. Around him, his crew moved in slow, exhausted motions, as if even panic had become too expensive to afford. 6 hours. That was all that remained for everyone aboard. In the corner of the bridge, the younglings sat quietly, their small bodies struggling to breathe the thinning air. Their gills fluttered desperately, trying to pull life from a dying atmosphere. Dr. Ke moved from patient to patient, but her medical scanner had already reached its limits. There was only so much science could do against vacuum and time. Vel closed his eyes for a brief moment, forcing himself to think clearly. Panic would not save anyone. Commands might. Emergency beacon, he said finally. Finn looked up from the navigation console. Captain, the chances of rescue are... I know, Vel interrupted quietly. Activate it anyway. The system came alive with a faint hum, projecting a holographic map of nearby star systems. One by one, civilizations were marked. One by one, they were eliminated. Too far. Too slow. No response capability. No faster-than-light reach within the survival window. Hope died in neat mathematical certainty. Then the system paused. A single signal appeared. Green. Close. Immediate response capability. Suitable rescue civilization found. The computer announced calmly. Designation, Earth. Species, human. Technology level, faster-than-light capable. Estimated arrival time, 18 hours. For a moment, no one spoke. 18 hours might as well have been eternity. Then Finn's fingers moved across the database terminal. His expression changed before he even said a word. Captain, his voice tightened. Earth is classified under restricted archives. Vel felt a chill. Restricted? Finn swallowed. Death world designation. Extreme hazard. Contact forbidden. Species labeled highly dangerous. The bridge fell into silence so heavy it felt physical. Everyone knew what a death world meant. A place so violent that only the most aggressive, most unforgiving life forms could survive. And those species, they did not evolve kindness. Vel looked at the dying children again. 18 hours. Then he looked at the warning. Forbidden. Dangerous. Aggressive. His hand trembled slightly. Database could be wrong, he said softly, more to himself than anyone else. No species reaches the stars without intelligence. Without structure. Without control. Finn hesitated. Or without brutality. Another alarm beeped. Life support, 28%. A decision was no longer philosophy. It was math. Vel activated the beacon. A pulse of faster-than-light transmission erupted into space, carrying their coordinates, their desperation, and their hope toward a world they had been told never to contact. Then they waited. Space answered with silence. Hours passed like slow suffocation. Oxygen levels dropped again. One of the crew collapsed near the engineering console and did not rise. The younglings grew weaker, their movement slower, their eyes half closed. Then the communication system cracked. A voice came through. Not soft. Not gentle. Controlled. Precise. Attention vessel gentle current. This is Admiral Kane of the Terran Defense Command. We have received your distress signal. Rescue operations are being initiated. Stand by. Relief hit the bridge like a shockwave. Some of the crew cried openly. Others collapsed where they stood. They were saved. But Vel did not feel relief. Not fully. Defense Command. Not Rescue Agency. Not Science Guild. Military. The word echoed in his mind as the signal repeated itself. Something about it felt wrong. Or perhaps too right. Because only a species that expected danger would organize like that. Outside, unseen engines of impossible power began to move through the dark. Deep inside human space, alarms sounded across a vast warship drifting silently in orbit. The iron hammer came alive like a waking predator. Admiral Kane studied the incoming transmission with narrowed eyes. Alien distress. Biological signatures confirmed. Children present. But something else lingered beneath it. Uncertainty. Colonel Reed leaned closer. Could be bait, sir. Kane did not answer immediately. He had seen too many traps dressed as mercy. Then the medical scan appeared. 43 life signs. Fading fast. Some small enough to be children. That changed everything. Launch the iron hammer, Kane ordered. Full rescue configuration. If it's a trap, we adapt. If it's real, we don't waste time. The ship responded instantly. Massive engines ignited. Space folded. And something enormous began moving toward the dying vessel. Vel saw it first as a distortion in space itself. A tear forming where nothing should exist. Light bending wrong. Reality folding like fabric under pressure. Then it arrived. The ship was not simply large. It was overwhelming. A black fortress of armor and weaponry, scarred by battles that had never been recorded in any council archive. Every surface spoke of violence survived. Of wars endured. Of enemies erased. The Aquari crew instinctively stepped back. This is rescue? Someone whispered. The iron hammer did not look like salvation. It looked like judgment. Then communication returned. Alien vessel, this is Admiral Kane. Prepare for boarding. We are here to assist. Do not activate defensive systems. We are not hostile. Vel's throat tightened. Not hostile was not the same as safe. But the younglings were dying. He made the only choice left. We surrender, he said quietly. We need help. The pause. Then another voice, softer this time. This is Captain Morrison of the Iron Hammer. Surrender not required. We are here to save you. Confusion spread across the bridge. Before they could process it, the ship docked. Airlocks engaged. Footsteps echoed through metal corridors. Heavy. Controlled. Purposeful. Then the door opened. A figure stood there in armored form, taller than any Aquari, covered in battle-worn plating. The helmet lifted. And beneath it was not a monster. Just a human face. Tired. Focused. We're medical team, the human said. Where are the critical patients? Silence broke. Not fear. Disbelief. Because nothing matched the database anymore. Warriors moved in behind her. Not with weapons raised, but with medical kits. Portable life systems. Scanners. Breathing support units. They did not inspect the ship like conquerors. They moved like rescuers arriving late to a disaster they intended to fix. One of them knelt beside a youngling. Easy, the medic said softly. The child flinched, then slowly calmed as oxygen returned through a carefully adjusted mask. Bell stared. You are soldiers, he said. The medic looked up briefly. Yes. Then why are you doing this? The human paused. Because they're alive. That was all. No philosophy. No doctrine. Just fact. Within minutes, the entire bridge transformed. Injured crew lifted carefully. Oxygen systems deployed. Emergency life support restored. Death reversed step by step. And the more the Aquari watched, the more impossible it became to reconcile what they were seeing with what they had been taught. Soldiers who healed. Warships that saved. Weapons-designed ships turned into hospitals. Vel was moved to the human vessel as his final transfer. The Iron Hammer's interior was vast but modified. Spaces adjusted. Atmosphere corrected. Even lighting softened. Every adjustment said the same thing. You are safe here. For the first time since the disaster, Vel breathed without fear. Days passed. Every Aquari survived. Even the younglings. They played now with human crew members in recreation bays, learning gestures, sounds, laughter. The concept was breaking Vel's understanding of reality. Deathworlders did not behave like this. They were supposed to be monsters. So why were they gentle? Finally, he was brought before Admiral Kane. The human leader studied him carefully. Your council, Kane said, classified us as dangerous. Vel nodded slowly. Yes. Based on what? Vel hesitated. They say Deathworld species are violent, unstable, always aggressive. Kane leaned back slightly. And after meeting us? Silence. Vel looked down. I don't understand your species, he admitted. Everything I was taught is wrong. Kane's expression hardened slightly. Not anger. Something colder. Or incomplete, he said. A map appeared behind him. Military installations. Expansion zones. Fleet movements. The Council isn't peaceful, Kane continued. It's controlled. Predatory in structure. And it fears anything it can't regulate. Vel's mind struggled. Everything he believed began to fracture. Because the humans were not the threat. They were the ones being surrounded. The galaxy he knew was not balanced. It was manipulated. And in that moment, Vel understood something terrifying. His rescue had not just saved his life. It had changed the fate of the galaxy. And he would have to choose which truth survived. Vel sat in silence long after Admiral Kane had finished speaking. The room of the Iron Hammer felt different now. Not because it had changed, but because his understanding of it had. The same walls that once felt like the inside of a weapon now felt like the inside of something far more unsettling. Order. Not chaos. Not savagery. Order built for survival. Kane stood beside the star map, watching shifting movements across the galaxy like a man studying a battlefield that was already in motion. The Vorak fleet reaches Proxima in 6 days, Kane said calmly. And they are not the only ones moving. Vel's throat tightened. You're certain they will attack? Morrison answered instead, his voice quieter but sharper. We've intercepted their communications. They want it to look like we struck first. That sentence landed heavier than any explosion. Vel leaned forward slightly. But why would the Council allow that? They are a union of peaceful species. Kane gave a short, humorless exhale. Peaceful doesn't mean honest. And unions don't always mean unity. Vel shook his head slowly, as if refusing to let the thought fully form. You are saying the Council is hiding something. I'm saying, Kane replied, they built a system where only certain types of species are allowed to matter. The words made no sense at first. Then they started to. Vel remembered something Finn had once said in passing during long jumps between stars. No Deathworld species in the Council. Ever. At the time, it had sounded like caution. Now it sounded like exclusion. A controlled selection of life. Kane turned from the map and looked directly at Vel. Tell me something, Captain. In all your travels, have you ever met a Council species from a harsh world? Vel opened his mouth, then stopped. He searched his memory carefully. Desert planets. Ocean worlds. Temperate garden systems. Lush biospheres where life was abundant and danger minimal. He found nothing else. No, he admitted quietly. Kane nodded once. Convenient. The word carried more weight than accusation. It carried pattern recognition. Vel felt something uncomfortable forming in his mind. A gap where explanation should have been. Morrison stepped closer. Your Council didn't just classify us as dangerous. They erased us from your acceptable reality. Vel looked up sharply. That is impossible. Is it? Morrison asked gently. You were prepared to die rather than trust us. Silence followed. Because it was true. And truth was harder to deny when you were still alive because of it. A soft alarm chimed in the background. Tactical updates. Fleet movements. Kane glanced at it briefly. The Vorak are accelerating, he said. They've entered staging positions. Vel felt his stomach tighten. Then we must warn the Council. Kane looked at him for a long moment. Would they believe you? The question was simple. But it cut deep. Vel hesitated. Then slowly, honestly he answered. No. Morrison nodded once. That's what we thought. The room fell quiet again, but it was no longer peaceful silence. It was preparation. Kane turned toward the command console. Bring up the Iron Hammer's full operational status. The display expanded instantly. Weapons systems. Medical bays. Troop readiness. Energy reserves. Vel stared at it. You are preparing for war, he said quietly. Kane didn't deny it. We are preparing for contact, he corrected. The difference was subtle. But Vel was beginning to understand that humans often hid truth inside precision of language. Contact meant anything that arrived. Friend or enemy. Morrison stepped forward. Captain Vel, I want you to understand something. Vel looked at him. When we came for you, Morrison said, we didn't know what you were. We just knew you were dying. He paused slightly. And that was enough. Vel felt something shift in his chest again. Not fear this time. Confusion. Because in council doctrine, unknown always meant risk. Risk always meant delay. Delay always meant procedure. But humans had ignored all of that. They had simply acted. Vel whispered almost to himself. You did not even hesitate. Kane answered from across the room. Hesitation gets people killed. The pause. Then softer. Or ignored. Vel looked down at his hands. In the council, everything was structured. Evaluated. Classified. Approved. Here, decisions were made in seconds when lives were on the line. It felt wrong. And yet, it had saved him. A new transmission alert broke the moment. Colonel Reed stepped in quickly. Sir, updated intel from reconnaissance drones. Kane turned immediately. Report. Reed's face tightened. Vorak fleet is not alone anymore. The room shifted. Vel looked up sharply. What does that mean? Reed hesitated before answering. 2 more council-aligned fleets are converging. Riel and Hegemony. Silence fell again. Morrison exhaled slowly. So it's not just an attack. Kane finished the thought. It's coordinated. Vel felt his blood run cold. They are uniting, he whispered. Against you. Kane corrected him again. Against what we represent. Vel stood slowly. His legs still weak, but his mind suddenly too awake. And what do you represent? Kane met his eyes. Something they can't control. That answer lingered longer than anything else said in the room. Outside the command center, the iron hammer shifted course slightly, adjusting toward human space. Toward Proxima. Vel felt it through the floor. A direction change that felt like inevitability. Where are we going? He asked. Kane didn't look away from the tactical display. To see what kind of war they are preparing, he said. Before it reaches our civilians. Vel swallowed. You are going toward it, he said. Yes. Even if it is dangerous? Kane finally looked at him fully. A tired, steady gaze. Captain, he said quietly, danger is not new to us. The pause. But ignoring it is what we refuse to do. Vel felt something inside him begin to break. Not his fear. His certainty. Because everything he had been taught about civilization had one core rule. Avoid confrontation. Maintain peace. Preserve structure. But humans moved toward threats. Not away from them. Because others were already inside them. The iron hammer entered hyperspace again, and space bent around its massive frame like reality itself was making way. Vel stood near the viewing window as stars stretched into lines of impossible speed. Behind him, he heard the quiet movement of soldiers preparing stations. Medical teams checking supplies. Engineers adjusting systems. No panic. Only readiness. And slowly, painfully, Vel realized something else. These were not people preparing to conquer. These were people preparing to protect something they considered already theirs. Lives. Not territory. Lives. And that distinction changed everything he thought he understood about war. The iron hammer dropped out of hyperspace with the kind of controlled violence that made Vel's stomach twist. Space itself seemed to snap back into place around them, and for a brief moment the universe felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Then the alarms began. Not panic alarms. Strategic ones. Fleet-wide sensors activated across the ship as the forward observation array locked onto the Proxima system. And what they saw made the entire command deck go still. Vel stepped closer to the viewing display without realizing it. At first it looked like stars had clustered unnaturally in one region of space. Too many. Too dense. Then the system resolved the image. Chips. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Formations layered in disciplined structure, each fleet marked with insignias Vel recognized instantly from Council archives. Vorak Empire, Riel Confederacy, Hegemony Coalition, all converging in the same region of space like a tightening noose. By the deep currents, Vel whispered. Morrison stood beside him, arms crossed. That's not a patrol group. That's an invasion force. Vel shook his head slowly, as if refusing the reality forming in front of him. They cannot be working together. These species have competing territories, competing doctrines. Kane cut in sharply. Unless someone coordinated them. Silence hit the room again. Vel felt a cold realization crawl through him. The Council, he said quietly, would never coordinate military action. Kane turned slightly toward him. Or they would never admit it. On the main tactical screen, data streams began pouring in. Energy signatures. Fleet compositions. Weapon classifications. Reed stepped forward. Sir, Vorak Dread carriers confirmed. Riel stealth bombers in flank formation. Hegemony artillery ships at rear guard. Kane studied the display carefully. They're not just attacking Proxima, he said. They're encircling it. Morrison's expression darkened. They're cutting off escape routes. Vel felt something tighten in his chest. There are civilians there? Kane nodded once. Human colony. 50,000. The number hit Vel harder than expected. 50,000 lives. Not soldiers. Not fleets. Not politics. People. He looked at the massive gathering of alien warships again, and for the first time, the word council didn't feel like unity. It felt like containment, a system large enough to hide intent. Reed zoomed in on intercepted transmissions. They're broadcasting encrypted coordination channels. We've cracked part of it. Kane gestured. Play it. The bridge speakers filled with fragmented alien speech. Cold, clinical, strategic. Vel didn't understand most of it, but he understood tone. And the tone was not defensive. It was preparatory. Then one translated fragment came through clearly. Phase 1 begins when human response is confirmed. Vel felt his blood go cold. Kane didn't react immediately, but his jaw tightened slightly. Morrison exhaled slowly. So they are waiting for us. Reed nodded. They want us to respond. Vel stepped forward. Why would they want that? Kane answered without hesitation. Because they need a trigger. The meaning settled in slowly. Vel shook his head. No, that does not make sense. The Council does not initiate war. Kane finally looked at him directly. Then explain why they're positioning fleets around one of our colonies. Vel had no answer. Because there wasn't a Council doctrine for this. Not one he had ever been taught. On the lower deck, Marines were already mobilizing. Armored units moving through corridors. Weapons being checked. Medical teams staging behind them. But even through all of that, there was no chaos. Only structure. Vel noticed that again. Humans did not panic in the face of overwhelming force. They organized. As if chaos itself was just another problem to solve. Kane turned toward his officers. Time to impact? Reed checked the data. 6 days until full convergence. But skirmish elements could engage within 48 hours. Kane nodded once. Then we prepare. Morrison stepped forward. Evacuation protocols? Kane shook his head. No evacuation. The pause. Then he continued. We don't abandon worlds because someone threatens them. Vel felt that sentence land heavily. Not as strategy. As identity. He looked at Kane. You will fight all of them? Kane's expression didn't change. If necessary, he said, yes. Vel whispered, almost unconsciously. That is impossible. Morrison gave a faint, tired smile. So was saving you, apparently. That broke something in Vel again. Because it wasn't said with pride. It was said like a fact. Like survival itself was just another task humans handled when required. Reed zoomed in on another data stream. Sir, there's more. Kane turned. Go on. Reed hesitated. We're detecting internal Council comms. There's disagreement. Vel looked up sharply. Disagreement? Reed nodded. Some council factions are requesting withdrawal. Others are pushing for full engagement. Kane studied the data for a moment. So even they are not unified. Morrison leaned closer. That's interesting. Kane didn't look away from the display. No. That's expected. Vel frowned. Why would it be expected? Kane finally turned toward him. Because systems built on control always fracture when exposed to resistance. Silence followed. Vel felt the words sink deeper than he wanted. Control. Not peace. Not unity. Control. The iron hammer adjusted formation slightly, moving closer to the edge of the Proxima system. Vel could see it now on the external display. The human colony. Right. Fragile looking from this distance. And around it, the storm. Alien fleets shifting into final staging positions. Waiting. Vel's voice came out quieter than he intended. They are waiting for you to arrive. Kane nodded once. Yes. Why? Kane didn't answer immediately. Then he said it. Because they want us to prove them right. Vel blinked. Kane continued. If we fire first, they call us monsters. If we don't defend ourselves, they erase us. Morrison added quietly. Either way, we lose the narrative. Vel felt something twist inside him. Narrative. The word felt wrong in this context. Lives were not narrative. But the galaxy seemed to treat them that way. Reed stepped back slightly. Sir, final systems check complete. We are ready for engagement if required. Kane nodded. Hold position just outside their detection threshold. The iron hammer slowed. Not retreating. Waiting. Vel stood near the viewing glass, watching fleets that could destroy entire civilizations drift in coordinated silence. Then he asked the question he had been avoiding since he first saw them. Why do you not call the council? The room went quiet. Even Morrison looked at Kane. Kane didn't respond immediately. Then he said something that changed the tone of everything. Because the council is already here. Vel turned slowly. What? Kane gestured toward the fleet. Not physically, he said. But strategically. Reed nodded grimly. These fleets didn't assemble randomly. This is coordinated doctrine. Morrison added, which means approval. Vel felt his mind struggle to process it. You are saying the council authorized this. Kane corrected him again. I'm saying the council is composed of species that benefit from this structure. The pause. Then softer. And structures don't act without interest. Vel looked at the fleets again. And for the first time, he didn't see peacekeepers. He saw an ecosystem. One that punished anything outside its design. Behind him, the iron hammer's engines pulsed softly. Not moving yet. Just waiting for the moment history would decide what it was. And Vel realized, with growing dread, that his presence here was no longer as a rescued scientist. He was a witness. To the moment the galaxy stopped pretending it was peaceful. The silence before the first movement of battle was always the worst kind of sound. Vel could feel it now through the iron hammer's hull. Not noise. Expectation. Outside the viewing array, the Proxima system looked deceptively calm. A star glowing steadily. A few planetary bodies drifting in predictable orbits. Civilian traffic lanes still faintly visible like fragile threads stretched across a storm that had not yet broken. And then the first fleet shifted. It was subtle at first. A recalibration of formation. But the iron hammer's sensors caught it instantly. Reed stepped forward. Vorak forward carriers are adjusting vector. Riel bombers are splitting into 3 wings. Kane didn't look away from the display. They're opening lanes. Morrison's voice tightened slightly. For an approach corridor. Vel felt a chill crawl up his spine. Toward the colony? Kane nodded once. Yes. Vel swallowed hard. Then it has begun. Kane corrected him quietly. No, Captain. It has been decided. Now it is just execution. That distinction made Vel's stomach tighten. Decided. Not started. As if the outcome had already been written somewhere far above them. On the tactical grid, new data streamed in. Reed's expression sharpened. Sir, colony defenses are activating. The human colony around Proxima was waking up. Small defense platforms unfolded from orbital stations. Satellite arrays shifted into combat alignment. Energy shields began to shimmer faintly across orbital lanes like translucent skin forming over a vulnerable body. Bell stared at it. "They are prepared," he said quietly. Kane nodded. "They've been prepared for years." Morrison added, "Just not for this many at once." Vel turned slightly. "And yet you are still outnumbered." Kane finally looked at him. "Yes." The pause. Then he added, "Significantly." Vel felt the weight of that sink in. Hundreds of Council warships against a single human colony system. Even with the Iron Hammer, the imbalance was absurd. "Then why are you not retreating?" Vel asked. Kane didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied the formation patterns again. Then he said something that didn't sound like strategy. "It's not about winning, Captain." Vel frowned. "Then what is it about?" Kane's eyes stayed on the fleet. "About what survives after." Silence again. But this one felt heavier than the last. On the external feed, a new transmission spike appeared. Reed reacted instantly. "Incoming fleet-wide broadcast." Kane's expression hardened slightly. "Put it through." The bridge speakers filled with a unified signal. Not fragmented this time. Coordinated. A single message carried across multiple fleets. Vel could not understand all of it, but the translation overlay struggled to keep up as meaning built itself in fragments. Human assets detected. Non-compliant species. Expansion containment required. Prevent further territorial instability. Vel's breath caught. "Assets?" he repeated softly. Morrison's face darkened. "They're not calling us a species anymore." Kane nodded once. "They're calling us a problem." Reed zoomed in on the fleet convergence point. "Sir, all three fleets are locking on colony infrastructure." Kane's voice dropped. "Targeting civilian structures?" Reed hesitated. "Energy nodes, communication hubs, transport corridors." Morrison exhaled slowly. "They're isolating it." Vel felt something inside him twist violently. "They are preparing to cut it off," he said. Kane nodded. "Yes." "And then?" Kane finally looked at him. "Then they test how we respond." Vel whispered almost to himself. "This is not war. This is analysis." Kane's expression didn't change. "That's what makes it worse." A sudden shift rippled through the Iron Hammer. The fleet had moved again. But this time, it was different. Not positioning. Not probing. Deployment. Reed's voice sharpened. "Sir, Vorak strike wings are accelerating." Morrison straightened instantly. "They're initiating forward pressure." Kane didn't hesitate. "Shields up. Full readiness." The Iron Hammer responded. Deep systems awakened. Energy fields flared outward. The ship's silhouette hardened against the void like a blade unsheathing. Vel instinctively braced himself. Outside, the Vorak carriers began to advance. Slowly at first, then faster, like a tide no longer pretending to wait. And the Riel bombers followed. And the Hegemony artillery line shifted into firing alignment. The galaxy was no longer watching. It was acting. Vel's voice came out strained. "This is it." Kane nodded once. "Yes." The pause. Then he added quietly, "Welcome to First Contact, Captain." Vel almost laughed at the absurdity of it. This was not contact. This was pressure. On worlds. On people. On truth. Reed called out again. "Incoming energy signatures detected from Vorak fleet." Morrison's tone sharpened. "They're charging weapons." Vel felt his chest tighten. "They will fire on the colony?" Kane's eyes narrowed slightly. "If we let them believe there will be no consequence." Silence followed that. Because it meant the same thing in every language. Everything depended on what happened next. On the Iron Hammer, every station was now active. Marines stood ready in deployment bays. Med teams secured. Engineers locked into damage control positions. Weapons systems humming softly like restrained thunder. No one fired. Not yet. Kane's voice came low and steady. "All ships. Hold position." Reed looked at him sharply. "Sir, we're within their engagement window." I know. Morrison stepped closer. Then why are we not reacting? Kane finally turned slightly. Because I want them to show intent first. Vel felt a cold realization form. You are documenting them, he said quietly. Kane nodded once. Yes. Reed frowned. For what purpose? Kane's answer was simple. So the galaxy cannot pretend this is misunderstanding. Silence hit again. But now it felt different. Not waiting. Witnessing. Outside, the Vorak fleet fired the first volley. Space lit up in violent arcs of energy. Not toward the Iron Hammer. Toward the colony. Vel's breath stopped. And in that moment, everything changed. Because now it was no longer theory. No longer positioning. No longer narrative. It was happening. The Iron Hammer surged forward instantly. Kane's voice cut through the bridge like steel. All units. Defend the colony. And for the first time since Vel had arrived in human space, he understood what humans meant when they said they did not abandon those who called for help. It was not philosophy. It was action. Even if the galaxy itself tried to stop them. The moment the first wave of energy fire struck the Proxima colony shields, space itself seemed to shudder. Bright arcs of destruction splashed across invisible barriers, bending light into violent ripples that lit up the entire system like a dying star. The colony did not fall immediately, but the impact was undeniable. Each hit pushed the shield grid closer to collapse, forcing defensive stations into emergency overload cycles. Vel stood frozen at the viewing array. Not because he didn't understand what was happening, but because he finally did. This is not a warning strike, he whispered. Kane's voice was steady, but colder now. No. Reed's hands moved rapidly across the tactical interface. Colony shields at 73% and dropping. Orbital platforms are returning fire, but they're heavily outgunned. Morrison leaned forward. Enemy fleets are coordinating impact timing. They're trying to overwhelm recharge cycles. Vel turned slowly toward Kane. They are testing how fast you can fail. Kane didn't look at him. Yes. Another volley struck. This time closer. A section of outer orbital defense exploded into fragments of glowing metal, spinning helplessly into the void. Vel flinched. They are destroying infrastructure first, he said. Not people. Kane finally looked at him. That's how most empires start convincing themselves it isn't genocide. Silence followed. Heavy. Uncomfortable. On the tactical display, more warnings appeared. Reed spoke quickly. Sir, colony evacuation corridors are being targeted. Civilian transport lanes are compromised. Morrison's jaw tightened. They're sealing escape routes. Vel felt something break inside his understanding again. You said they wanted you to respond, he said slowly. But this is designed to force escalation. Kane nodded once. Yes. Why? Kane's answer came without hesitation. Because escalation creates justification. Vel stared at him. For what? Reed answered instead, voice grim. For calling us the aggressor. That sentence froze the room more effectively than any weapon. Vel looked back at the battlefield forming in real time. Hundreds of warships. One colony. And a narrative already being shaped somewhere beyond sight. They will say you attacked first, Vel said quietly. Kane nodded. That is the plan. Vel's voice dropped. And if you defend the colony? Kane finally turned toward him. Then we become what they already decided we are. Silence stretched. Outside, the Iron Hammer surged forward, breaking its holding position. Not alone. Human response fleets began to arrive. Smaller than the combined Council Armada, but faster. Sharper. More coordinated. They emerged from folded space like blades drawn from darkness. Reinforcements labeled with Earth fleet designations lit up across Kane's display. Reed exhaled slightly. Second fleet arriving. And third. Morrison allowed himself a brief nod. Now it's even. Vel shook his head slowly. Nothing about this is even. Kane didn't disagree. On the external feed, space was becoming a layered battlefield. Energy fire crossed between fleets in geometric patterns. Defensive shields flared. Interceptors moved in disciplined arcs, intercepting incoming volleys with calculated precision. And yet, the colony was still under pressure. Always under pressure. Kane's voice cut through again. Focus fire on Riel bombers. Their coordinating colony grid collapse. Reed acknowledged instantly. Targeting. The iron hammer shifted its weapon arrays. For the first time, Vel saw them not as symbols of fear, but as tools being used with surgical precision. Energy lances fired, not randomly, but deliberately. Each strike disrupted a formation pattern, breaking synchronization across enemy wings. Morrison called out. Vorak carriers are adjusting. They're trying to compensate. Kane narrowed his eyes. They adapt quickly. Vel watched the engagement unfold, his mind struggling to keep pace. This is not chaos, he said slowly. Kane glanced at him. No. This is structured destruction. Morrison gave a short, humorless exhale. That's war. Vel didn't respond, because something deeper was forming in his understanding. The humans were not fighting like predators. They were fighting like systems correcting another system. Not rage. Response. Reed suddenly looked up. Sir, incoming transmission from Proxima Colony Defense Command. Kane nodded. Patch it through. A new voice filled the bridge. Human. Strained. But controlled. Colonial defense to Iron Hammer. We are at 61% shield integrity. Requesting immediate suppression of enemy forward wings. Kane responded immediately. Acknowledged. Hold position. Reinforcements are stabilizing your perimeter. The voice paused. Then, copy that, Admiral. We're still holding civilians in lower arc sectors. We cannot evacuate under current fire. Kane's expression hardened. Understood. We will create a corridor. Vel felt something tighten in his chest. Even here. Even in the middle of an interstellar engagement. The first concern was still civilians. Not victory. Not punishment. People. Morrison gestured toward the tactical map. We can open a gap between Riel and Higmany formations. It'll give them a partial evacuation window. Kane nodded once. Do it. Orders flowed instantly. Human fleets shifted, not to destroy everything in front of them, but to reshape the battlefield itself. Vel realized something unsettling. They were not trying to win the fight. They were trying to control it, so it did not consume what they were protecting. Another explosion lit the far side of the colony ring. This time closer to infrastructure housing. Vel's voice came out quietly. If even one shield segment fails. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Kane answered anyway. Then we repair it. Vel looked at him sharply. In the middle of battle? Kane nodded. Yes. Morrison added almost casually, we've done worse. Vel stared at them. That level of certainty was not confidence. It was experience. Then Reed spoke again, voice tight. Vorak flagship is moving. The entire bridge shifted attention instantly. On the display, a massive vessel broke formation. Not firing. Not defending. Advancing. Directly toward the iron hammer. Kane narrowed his eyes. So they've decided on escalation point. Vel felt his throat tighten. What does that mean? Morrison answered softly. They want to kill the command ship. Silence fell. Because now it was personal in a way that changed everything. Kane studied the incoming trajectory. Let them come, he said quietly. Reed hesitated. Sir? Kane's voice hardened slightly. Hold all fire until they commit. Vel turned toward him sharply. That ship will reach you. Kane finally looked at him. Yes. The pause. Then calmly. And then we will respond. Outside, the Vorak flagship accelerated. Space bent slightly around its sheer mass. Weapons charging. Intent clear. And for the first time, Vel understood something terrifying about humans. They did not react early. They reacted completely. Not before the line was crossed, but exactly when it was. The moment the flagship crossed firing threshold, the iron hammer did not hesitate. Kane spoke one word. Now. And the galaxy learned what it meant when a species built for survival stopped holding back. The Vorak flagship crossed the threshold like a knife cutting through glass. For a fraction of a second, everything on the tactical grid froze as targeting locks finalized across the iron hammer systems. Then the human ship responded. Not with panic. Not with scattered fire. With precision. The iron hammer's forward arrays lit up in synchronized sequence, and space erupted into controlled streams of energy that moved like guided lightning. Vel felt the vibration through the deck plating as the massive vessel shifted its entire combat profile in real time. "This is it," Morrison said quietly. Reed's voice cut through the tension. "All weapons hot. Target solution locked." Kane did not raise his voice. "Fire." The iron hammer struck. But what Vel expected, what the Council records had always implied, was destruction without restraint. What he saw instead was something far more terrifying in its discipline. Every shot landed with intent. The Vorak flagship's forward shield grid collapsed in a staggered pattern, not destroyed all at once, but dismantled section by section. Power relays failed in cascading isolation. Weapon systems flickered offline as if someone had reached into the ship and quietly removed its ability to fight. Vel stared. "They're disabling it," he said. Morrison nodded. "We're not here to erase them. We're here to stop them." Another volley from the iron hammer struck, but this one targeted propulsion nodes. The Vorak flagship began to drift, its acceleration broken, its trajectory unstable. Reed exhaled sharply. Enemy flagship is losing maneuver control. Kane's expression remained unchanged. "But keep their weapons intact but unusable." Vel turned toward him sharply. "Why would you leave their weapons intact?" Kane answered without hesitation. "Because we are not trying to teach fear. We are trying to prevent casualties." That distinction hit Vel harder than any blast wave. Outside, the battlefield was changing. The Vorak fleet, seeing their flagship neutralized, began to react aggressively, but not intelligently. Their formation broke cohesion for the first time. And that was all the humans needed. Human reinforcements moved in layered formation. Not rushing. Not scattering. Coordinated like a single organism. Reed pointed to the map. Riel wing collapsing. They can't maintain synchrony without Vorak command node. Morrison allowed a short nod. "Remove the head, the body hesitates." Vel whispered almost to himself. "But you did not destroy the head." Kane answered immediately. "Because we don't need to." Another shift. Higmany artillery ships attempted a long-range saturation strike toward the colony shield. But before the volleys reached impact, human interceptor arrays activated in overlapping defensive layers. Hundreds of incoming projectiles were intercepted mid-flight, not with explosions of chaos, but with precise, timed neutralizations. The sky over Proxima lit up like a controlled storm. Vel could not look away. "This is not war like the Council describes it," he said quietly. Morrison glanced at him. "What do they call it?" Vel hesitated. "Collapse," he admitted. Kane's eyes narrowed slightly. "That's because they don't fight to protect anything." Silence followed. Then Reed spoke again. "Sir, colony evacuation corridor is open. Civilians are beginning to move." On the display, Vel saw it. Small transport ships slipping through a narrow protected lane carved through the battlefield by human fleet positioning. Protected not by distance, but by dominance. Any Council ship attempting to cross that corridor was immediately met with overwhelming deterrence fire, not lethal, but absolute. Vel felt something shift again in his understanding. "You are carving space itself around them," he said quietly. Kane nodded once. "That's the job." Morrison added, "Safe passage is not requested. It's enforced." Vel swallowed hard. Enforced safety. The concept itself felt alien. Another alarm sounded. Reed's tone sharpened. "Sir, Higmany Command Cluster is attempting mass relay jump." Kane reacted instantly. "Where?" Reed checked the data. "Unknown coordinates. Possibly retreat. Possibly regroup." Kane studied the map for a moment, then said quietly, "No. That's not retreat." Morrison's eyes narrowed. It's repositioning. Kane nodded. They're trying to reset the engagement narrative. Vel frowned. Narrative again. Kane looked at him. War is never just fought in space, Captain. It is fought in memory. That sentence lingered longer than the explosions outside. Reed confirmed the movement. Jump signature forming. Kane made a decision instantly. Disrupt it. The iron hammer shifted. A specialized pulse array activated, not destructive, but disruptive. Space around the hegemony cluster distorted violently. The jump corridor collapsed mid-formation. Ships that had been about to vanish across the galaxy instead staggered back into normal space in scattered disarray. Morrison allowed a faint breath. That's going to hurt their coordination. Kane didn't look satisfied. It will prevent them from escaping accountability. Vel turned sharply. Accountability? Kane finally looked at him. If they leave now, they will return later with a cleaner story. Silence. Vel slowly understood. This is not just about stopping them, he said quietly. Kane nodded. It is about making sure what happens here cannot be rewritten. Outside, the battlefield was beginning to shift again. Not toward victory, but toward clarity. The Vorak flagship drifted, disabled but still present. The Riel wings scattered, unable to maintain formation. The hegemony fleet, forced back into real space, struggled to reorganize under pressure. And the colony? Still standing. Shields damaged, flickering but intact. Civilians evacuating through a corridor carved by human precision. Vel watched it all. Then whispered, almost disbelieving. You are winning. Kane didn't answer immediately. Then he said, no. The pause. We are stabilizing. Vel looked at him. And for the first time, he understood the difference. Winning meant ending the enemy. Stabilizing meant preserving everything else. Even while the galaxy burned around it. The battlefield did not end when the Vorak flagship was disabled. It fractured. Like a system losing its central logic, the surrounding fleets began to behave in ways that were no longer fully coordinated. Orders still existed, transmissions still flowed, but something fundamental had been broken. Control. Vel could see it in the shifting formations. The Riel bombers hesitated before committing to attacks. The hegemony artillery ships recalculated firing patterns that no longer aligned with a unified command structure. Even the Vorak escorts drifted slightly, as if unsure whether to defend or retreat. They're confused, Vel said quietly. Morrison shook his head. They're leaderless. Reed corrected immediately. Not leaderless. Disrupted. Kane's eyes remained fixed on the tactical grid. Same result for now. Vel looked at him. You removed their command ship. Kane nodded once. And their assumption of certainty. That word again. Certainty. Vel was beginning to realize how much of this conflict depended on it. On who believed they had control. And who did not. Outside, the iron hammer advanced slightly, not aggressively, but enough to shift the spatial balance of the engagement zone. Human reinforcements mirrored the movement instantly, expanding the protective envelope around the Proxima colony. Vel noticed something strange in the pattern. The humans were not pushing outward randomly. They were shaping space. Like enclosing a wound so it could heal. Reed called out. Civilian evacuation count rising. 30% of outer orbital population secured. Morrison nodded. Good. Keep corridor stable. Vel frowned slightly. You are prioritizing evacuation over pursuit. Kane answered without hesitation. Always. Vel turned toward him. Even if enemies escape? Kane finally looked at him. Escaping is not the same as surviving. That distinction lingered. Vel looked back at the battlefield. One of the Riel wings attempted a concentrated strike against the human corridor. But before the volley could reach its target, it was intercepted by layered defensive fire from 3 separate human ships. The attack dissolved mid-space. Morrison exhaled slowly. They're probing for weakness. Reed replied immediately. They won't find it in that corridor. Vel watched the exchange carefully. You built overlapping defenses, he said slowly. Kane nodded. No single-point failure. Vel frowned. That requires enormous coordination. Morrison gave a faint smile. And trust. That word hit differently now. Trust between thousands of ships operating in the middle of an active war zone. Vel struggled to reconcile it. In Council doctrine, coordination required hierarchy. Hierarchy required distance. Distance created delay. Delay created vulnerability. But here, everything moved like it was already agreed upon before the battle even began. Vel whispered, "How do you achieve that level of unity?" Kane's answer was simple. Training. Doctrine. Experience. The pause. Then softer. And refusal to fail each other. Silence followed. Outside, another shift occurred. The hegemony fleet began to withdraw in small segments, not full retreat, but strategic disengagement. Units peeling away like fragments detaching from a broken structure. Reed narrowed his eyes. They're falling back from primary engagement range. Morrison looked at Kane. That's a retreat pattern. Kane studied the data for a moment. Partial. Vel frowned. Partial? Kane pointed at the display. They're withdrawing combat assets, but keeping observation units. Vel felt uneasy. Why would they do that? Reed answered grimly. To report outcomes. Silence. Vel slowly understood. They are watching how you respond, he said quietly. Kane nodded once. Yes. And then they will tell the Council. Kane didn't deny it. Morrison added, which means this is no longer just a battle. Reed finished the thought. It's documentation. Vel felt something cold settle in his chest. So the war was not only being fought in space. It was being recorded in real time for judgment. Kane's voice cut through the tension. Let them watch. Reed glanced at him. Sir? Kane's expression hardened slightly. Because what they see cannot be undone. The iron hammer surged forward again. Not deeper into enemy lines, but laterally. Shifting position to reinforce the colony's northern shield arc. Vel noticed the movement pattern again. Always toward protection. Never toward unnecessary destruction. Morrison gestured toward the map. We're stabilizing all 3 evacuation corridors now. Reed confirmed. South, east, and partial west lanes are secure. Vel felt a strange sensation forming in his chest. Relief. But mixed with something heavier. Awareness. Because he could now clearly see the difference between the two forces. The Council fleets were trying to break structure, provoke reaction, and record outcome. The humans were trying to preserve structure, reduce reaction, and prevent outcome from escalating further. It was not symmetrical. Not even close. Another alert flashed. Reed's tone sharpened. Sir, unidentified transmission from Vorak remnants. Kane nodded. Play it. The bridge filled with broken, fragmented signals. Not coordinated this time. Panicked. Loss of command integrity. Human response exceeds projected models. Recalibrate engagement parameters. Vel listened carefully. And for the first time, he heard uncertainty in a Council-aligned force. Not tactical uncertainty. Existential uncertainty. Morrison frowned slightly. They didn't expect this level of response. Kane's eyes narrowed. No. They expected collapse. Vel turned toward him. Collapse. Kane nodded. They expected the colony to fall quickly. Then they expected us to respond emotionally instead of structurally. Reed added quietly, they planned for chaos, not containment. Vel looked back at the battlefield. And slowly the realization formed. The Council fleets were not losing because of superior firepower. They were losing because their assumptions were wrong. Outside, the last coordinated push from the Riel wing failed to breach human defensive layers. And then something shifted again. Not fire. Not movement. Silence. The enemy fleets began to hold position at a distance. Not advancing. Not fully retreating. Just observing. Kane studied the formation. They're reassessing. Morrison nodded. They're not used to this outcome. Vel whispered, because they expected you to behave like monsters. Kane looked at him. And we did not. The weight of that sentence settled heavily across the bridge. Vel stared at the battlefield one more time. The colony was still standing. Evacuation corridors were still active. Human fleets held formation like a shield built from discipline itself. And the Council Armada was hesitating. For the first time in recorded history, Vel finally spoke. "What happens now?" Kane did not answer immediately. Then he said quietly, "Now they decide whether they want to continue learning the wrong lesson." The pause. Then softer. Or finally accept the right one. And as the fleets held their distance across the shattered silence of Proxima space, Vel realized the battle was no longer about survival. It was about interpretation. And whoever controlled the interpretation of this moment would shape the future of the entire galaxy. The silence after the clash was not peace. It was recalculation. Across Proxima space, the enemy fleets held their positions like predators unsure whether the prey had suddenly learned to bite back. No further volleys were fired. No immediate advances were made. But every sensor array remained active, every formation kept its shape, every weapon stayed charged. They were watching. Vel could feel it even without the display. "They're not retreating," he said quietly. Kane nodded once. "No." Reed's voice was low. "They're waiting for confirmation." Morrison glanced at him. "Confirmation of what?" Reed answered grimly. "Whether we escalate further." Vel frowned. "But you already responded." Kane corrected him softly. "We responded proportionally." The pause. Then he added, "They are waiting to see if we become what they predicted." Vel slowly looked back at the tactical display. And understood. The battle was no longer about territory. It was about proof. On the outer edge of the colony, evacuation corridors continued to function under human protection. Civilian transports moved steadily through controlled gaps in the engagement zone. Every ship that passed through was escorted by layered defense positioning, ensuring no opportunistic strike could reach them. Vel watched one of those transports slip free of the system boundary. A fragile vessel. Alive. And it struck him again how differently humans measured success. Not by destruction, but by survival counts. Reed called out, "Final evacuation wave is 90% complete." Morrison nodded. "But that's the priority." Vel turned slightly. "Even while fleets remain engaged?" Kane answered without hesitation. "Especially then." Silence followed. Then another shift occurred. The Vorak remnants began reorganizing again, but differently this time. Slower. More cautious. Less unified. Reed narrowed his eyes. "Sir, they're forming observation clusters." Kane's expression hardened slightly. "Not attack formations." Morrison frowned. "They're documenting." Vel felt a chill. "So they are still recording everything." Kane nodded. "Yes." Vel swallowed. "For the Council." Kane did not respond immediately. Then he said quietly, "For whoever still believes the Council is neutral." That word again. Neutral. Vel was beginning to understand it was no longer a description. It was a weapon. On the battlefield display, a new transmission signature appeared. Reed frowned. "Incoming encrypted Council-wide relay." Kane gestured. "Open it." A fragmented broadcast filled the bridge. Multiple voices. Different species. Overlapping protocols. Partial translations struggling to keep pace. Containment failure. Human escalation unexpected. Reclassify engagement parameters. Risk assessment invalid. Vel listened carefully. And realized something disturbing. They were not discussing victory or defeat. They were discussing classification. Kane leaned slightly forward. "They're updating their narrative in real time." Reed nodded. "Adaptive framing." Morrison added quietly, "They're trying to preserve doctrine." Vel turned toward them. "Doctrine?" Kane answered, "Belief systems don't survive contradiction easily." The pause. Then softer. "Unless they can rewrite what caused it." Vel felt that sink in slowly. So the fleets were not just fighting. They were trying to define what this moment meant before it ended. Outside, a minor skirmish erupted near the colony's outer ring. Not a full assault. A probe. A test. A small Riel strike group attempted a fast run toward an evacuation corridor. But human response was immediate. 2 intercept wings converged, cutting off approach vectors before the strike group could reach firing range. No unnecessary destruction. Just denial of access. The enemy group broke formation instantly and withdrew. Morrison exhaled slowly. That's the 3rd probe in 10 minutes. Reed nodded. They're mapping response speed. Vel frowned. Why? Kane answered quietly. To find where we hesitate. Silence followed. Because the implication was simple. Any hesitation would be exploited. Vel looked at the battlefield again. Then asked the question forming in his mind. If they cannot defeat you, why do they continue testing you? Kane looked at him. Because they don't yet believe they cannot defeat us. The pause. Then softer. And because believing otherwise would require them to accept they were wrong from the beginning. Vel felt something tighten in his chest. So it was not just military conflict. It was belief collapse resistance. On the tactical grid, another change occurred. Reed's tone sharpened. Sir, Hegemony Fleet is transmitting withdrawal vectors again. Morrison raised an eyebrow. Second withdrawal attempt? Kane studied the movement carefully. They're splitting their forces. Vel frowned. That means? Reed answered. Internal disagreement is increasing. Kane nodded once. Pressure fractures alliances. Vel looked at him. You expected this. Kane didn't deny it. I expected instability, he said. Not certainty. Outside, the hegemony formation began to peel away more decisively this time. Entire wings detaching and drifting out of engagement range. Not retreating in panic, but disengaging with calculation. Reed spoke quietly. They're preserving assets. Morrison added, they're preparing for a second phase. Vel looked up sharply. There will be another phase? Kane's expression remained calm. There is always another phase when truth is inconvenient. Silence followed. The battlefield slowly stabilized into a tense equilibrium. Human fleets held protective arcs around the colony. Enemy fleets held distance, observing, recalculating, reframing. Neither side advancing. Neither side collapsing. Just locked. Vel stared at it for a long time. Then quietly said, So this is not the end of the battle. Kane nodded. No. The pause. This is the end of their certainty. Vel felt that sentence land deeply. Because certainty was the foundation of council authority. If that broke, everything else would follow. Reed suddenly looked up. Sir, final evacuation wave is clear. Colony civilian extraction complete. A brief silence filled the bridge. Then Morrison nodded slowly. Good. That's the objective met. Vel looked at the display. The colony was still damaged, but alive, and emptying into safety. Kane finally allowed himself a small breath. Hold positions, he said quietly. Do not pursue. Reed acknowledged. Holding. Vel turned toward him. You are not finishing them. Kane shook his head. No need. The pause. Then he added. They will finish themselves, deciding what they saw here. And as the fleets remained suspended across shattered space, Vel understood something fundamental. This war was not being decided by firepower alone. It was being decided by what each side would choose to believe afterward. And that was far more dangerous than any weapon in the system. The Proxima system did not return to normal. It simply stopped breaking further. That was the only way Vel could describe the uneasy balance forming across the battlefield. Enemy fleets remained in fragmented formations at the edge of engagement range. Human ships held a structured defensive lattice around the colony. No one advanced. No one fully withdrew. Every movement was small, deliberate, and watched. As if even motion itself had become evidence. Vel stood near the command deck viewport, staring at the frozen geometry of war outside. It feels wrong, he said quietly. Morrison glanced at him. Because it isn't finished. Vel shook his head slightly. No, because it feels like they are thinking more than fighting. Reed overheard and gave a short nod. That's exactly what they're doing. Kane stood at the central tactical display, arms folded behind his back. His voice was calm, but sharper now in a different way. They're trying to decide what category we belong in. Vel frowned. Category? Kane nodded once. Monster. Anomaly. Threat. Or precedent. Silence followed. Vel looked back at the enemy formations. So everything depends on how they label you? Kane answered without hesitation. In their system, yes. Vel felt something uneasy tighten in his chest, because he was beginning to understand the true war. It was not being fought with ships. It was being fought with definitions. Reed called out from the console. Sir, updated council-wide transmission feed is stabilizing. Multiple factions are submitting post-engagement reports. Morrison leaned forward. Already? Reed nodded. They are fast-tracking interpretation. Vel turned sharply. Interpretation of what? Kane answered quietly. Of whether this was justified. The words hung in the air like a blade suspended mid-fall. Outside, the Vorak remnants made another adjustment. Not an attack. A repositioning into observation arcs that formed wide hemispheres around the human fleet. Reed narrowed his eyes. They're increasing sensor focus. Morrison frowned. They want full visibility. Vel whispered. They are recording everything. Kane nodded once. Yes. The pause. Then softer. So no one can say they did not see it. Silence followed again. Vel felt something shifting in his understanding. This is not just military observation, he said slowly. It is legal. Kane glanced at him. Political, he corrected. But close enough. Vel turned toward him. So they are preparing arguments. Kane nodded. For what comes after? Reed suddenly stiffened. Sir, incoming transmission burst from Higmany cluster. Kane gestured. Play it. The bridge filled with fragmented, overlapping signals again. This time less coordinated. More urgent. Unexpected resistance profile. Human doctrine inconsistent with classification. Re-evaluating Death World Aggression Model. Request reassessment authority. Vel listened carefully. And felt a strange tension building in the tone. Not fear. Disruption. Kane watched the feed closely. They are questioning their assumptions. Morrison added quietly. That's more dangerous to them than losing ships. Vel frowned. Why? Kane answered simply. Because ships can be rebuilt. The pause. But belief systems cannot be repaired while they are still being used. Silence. Outside, the battlefield shifted again. Not violently. Subtly. A few council vessels began pulling further back, increasing distance from engagement zones. Not retreating entirely, but breaking unified alignment. Reed noticed immediately. Sir, fragmentation increasing. Kane nodded once. The narrative is splintering. Vel turned toward him. Narrative again. Kane looked at him directly. This entire engagement was never just about firepower. The pause. It was about whether they could still explain us. Vel felt that sink in deeply. Explain. Not defeat. Not destroy. Explain. Outside, a small group of Riel ships attempted one final controlled probe toward the colony perimeter. But before they could cross the threshold, human ships adjusted formation instantly. Not firing. Just repositioning. Blocking access. The probe halted immediately. And withdrew. Reed exhaled slightly. They're done testing forward pressure. Morrison nodded. They've hit confidence saturation. Vel frowned. Meaning? Kane answered quietly. They have learned enough to be uncertain. Silence followed. Vel stared at the fleets again. They will leave, he said slowly. Kane shook his head slightly. Not yet. The pause. First they will decide what to tell themselves about leaving. Vel looked at him. That sounds unnecessary. Kane's expression softened slightly. It is necessary for them. The pause. Without justification, retreat becomes admission. Vel felt a deeper realization forming. So even withdrawal required narrative permission. Reed suddenly spoke. Sir, final civilian transport wave has cleared system boundary. Morrison nodded once. Colony evacuation complete. A brief silence followed. Then something shifted in the atmosphere of the bridge. Not celebration, but release. Kane closed his eyes for a brief moment, then opened them again. Maintain defensive posture, he said quietly. Do not pursue. Reed confirmed. Holding. Vel looked at him. You are letting them go. Kane nodded. Yes. The pause. Because the objective is no longer here. Vel frowned. Then where is it? Kane turned slightly toward the tactical map, where streams of council fleets still hovered at a distance. Inside their decision process. Silence fell again. Vel slowly realized what that meant. The battle was ending not when fleets stopped firing, but when belief stabilized again, or collapsed completely. Outside, the enemy formations began to shift once more. Not toward attack, not toward retreat, but toward dispersal. Fragmentation increasing steadily. Reed watched carefully. Sir, they are breaking alignment completely now. Morrison exhaled. They're done coordinating. Kane nodded once. Then the engagement is over. Vel looked at him sharply. Just like that. Kane met his gaze. No. The pause. Just like that phase. Silence followed. And as the council fleets slowly drifted apart across Proxima space, no longer unified, no longer certain, Vel realized something irreversible. This was not a victory that ended war. It was a moment that ended agreement. And somewhere far beyond this system, the galaxy was beginning to argue with itself. The first report reached the council before the fleets fully disengaged. Not a transmission of defeat. Not a declaration of victory. A contradiction. Vel watched the data stream flicker across the Iron Hammer's command display as Kane's intelligence officers intercepted and decoded overlapping council channels. Reed's expression darkened. They've already started rewriting it. Morrison glanced at him. That was fast. Reed nodded grimly. Too fast. Vel frowned. Rewriting what exactly? Kane answered without looking away from the tactical feed. Reality. Silence followed. Outside, the Proxima system had settled into a strange calm. Human fleets maintained protective orbit around the colony, while council remnants drifted further out, forming scattered clusters of observation and transmission nodes. But now those nodes were busy. Too busy. Vel leaned closer to the display as new fragments of council communication were translated in real time. Unexpected human escalation disproves prior classification stability. Possible external manipulation of biological distress signal. Recommend containment review of human faction. Reaffirm Death World hazard status pending investigation. Vel's brow furrowed deeply. They are calling your rescue escalation? Kane gave a quiet, humorless breath. Of course they are. Morrison added, they need it to be. Vel turned toward them. Why? Reed answered bluntly. Because otherwise, they have to accept they were wrong. Silence followed. That word again. Wrong. Vel looked back at the fragmented transmissions. And if they were wrong? Kane finally turned toward him. Then everything built on that assumption becomes unstable. The pause. Policy. Orders. Authority. Fear. Vel felt a cold realization settle in his chest. So it is not just about you, he said slowly. It is about the entire structure of the council. Kane nodded once. Yes. Outside, a new development appeared on the tactical grid. Reed stiffened. Sir, Hegemony Cluster is broadcasting a unified statement. Morrison frowned. Unified? After fragmentation? Reed confirmed. They've stabilized internal messaging. Kane's eyes narrowed slightly. Play it. The bridge filled with a composed, formal transmission. This one was different. Controlled. Structured. Engagement with human faction resulted in unexpected resistance patterns. Classification of Death World aggression remains valid pending committee review. Human forces demonstrated anomalous restraint behavior inconsistent with hostile classification. Further observation required before diplomatic reassessment. Vel listened carefully. And slowly frowned. They are not denying what happened, he said quietly. Reed nodded. They are reframing it. Morrison added. They're turning it into a case study instead of a contradiction. Vel turned toward Kane. So they will not admit they were wrong. Kane shook his head slightly. No. The pause. They will admit it was complicated. Silence followed. Vel let that sink in. Complicated. A word that allowed everything to remain unchanged. Outside, council fleets continued dispersing slowly, but now with purpose again. Not unity, but aligned ambiguity. Each cluster carrying its own interpretation of the engagement. Reed studied the movement. They're separating into narrative factions. Morrison nodded. Different versions of the same event. Vel frowned. And that matters? Kane answered quietly. It determines what comes next. Silence. Then another alert flashed across the system. Reed's tone sharpened. Sir, new transmission priority spike. Council Central Relay Authority just activated. Kane straightened slightly. Central Authority? Reed nodded. They're elevating this to High Council Review status. Vel felt uneasy. That sounds important. Morrison gave a short laugh without humor. It is. Reed continued. They're requesting full battle logs, sensor records, biological data, and command transcripts from all participating vessels. Vel frowned. They want proof. Kane corrected him. They want control of interpretation. Silence. Outside, the last of the evacuation corridors had fully cleared. The Proxima colony now floated under human protective custody, its population safely out of immediate danger. But the system itself did not feel safe. It felt exposed. Vel finally spoke again. What will they conclude? Kane paused for a long moment. That depends on what they need to conclude. Vel frowned. That is not an answer. Kane looked at him. It is the only honest one. Silence followed. Reed suddenly spoke again. Sir, intercepted internal council directive. They are labeling human intervention as non-standard defensive aggression. Morrison exhaled slowly. So it's already being shaped. Vel looked up sharply. Non-standard means what? Kane answered quietly. It means they refuse to classify us as either innocent or guilty. The pause. So we remain unpredictable. Vel felt a deeper understanding forming now. Unpredictability was not neutrality. It was danger. Outside, council clusters began to slowly withdraw from the system boundary. Not fleeing. Not retreating. Departing with documentation packets intact. Reed watched them carefully. They're leaving observation satellites behind. Morrison nodded. Evidence collectors. Vel frowned. Evidence of what? Kane answered. Of whatever they decide this was. Silence followed. Vel looked at the departing fleets. So this is not over. Kane shook his head slightly. No. The pause. This is the moment before it spreads. Vel felt a chill run through him. Spreads. Kane turned toward him. To every system they control. Every classification database. Every diplomatic channel. Reed added quietly, every assumption they've ever made about us. Silence. Outside, the council fleets continued to fade into the distance, leaving behind a system that had been stabilized militarily, but destabilized politically. Vel looked at Kane. So what happens now? Kane finally allowed himself a slow breath. Now, he said quietly, we wait to see what version of us they decide is easier to live with. The pause. Then softer. Because that is the one they will make real. And as Proxima space grew quieter, Vel understood something he could not unlearn. The battle had not ended when the firing stopped. It had only moved into the minds of those who would decide what the firing meant.